Messages are arriving in your life right now. Not in words, in dreams that won't let go. Coincidences too precise to be random. Images that keep resurfacing. Pulls toward decisions that make no logical sense but feel undeniably right. Most people call this noise. Carl Jung spent his life proving it isn't. He believed something speaks to us, not through miracles, but through symbols built into the deep structure of the mind. Dreams, synchronicity, the unconscious. He called it the self. Call it God, the universe, or your own psyche. Jung said the message is real, constant, and modern life has trained us to ignore it. Today, we learn how to stop. 1. Why Jung believed dreams are not random. Modern science for a long time treated dreams as neurological noise, the brain processing the day's debris, meaningless firing, nothing worth serious interpretation. Jung rejected this completely, not out of mysticism, but out of decades of clinical observation. He noticed something remarkable across thousands of patients. Dreams were not random, they were compensatory, meaning the dream consistently appeared to correct, balance, or complete something the conscious mind was getting wrong during waking life. The person who was too rigid in their waking thinking would dream of wild, uncontrollable chaos. The person who was suppressing their anger would dream of violence they would never act out consciously. The person who was avoiding a decision would dream, repeatedly, of being lost, unable to find a path, a door, a way forward. Jung came to believe that the unconscious mind was not a garbage bin of forgotten thoughts. It was a second intelligence, operating continuously, aware of things the conscious mind had not yet acknowledged, and dreams were its primary method of communication. This is the foundation of everything we're about to explore. If you accept, even provisionally, that something intelligent operates beneath your conscious awareness, constantly processing what you refuse to process directly, constantly trying to correct what you are getting wrong, then the question becomes urgent. What has it been trying to tell you, and why have you stopped listening? 2. The symbol is the language, and you have forgotten the alphabet. Jung's most important insight, the one that underlies all his work, is this. The unconscious does not speak in words, it speaks in symbols. And modern human beings, trained from childhood in literal, logical, verbal thinking, have largely lost the ability to read this older language. Ancient and indigenous cultures, by contrast, were often fluent in it. They paid close attention to dreams, to omens, to the symbolic resonance of animals, weather, and chance events, not because they were less rational than modern people, but because they had not yet been trained to dismiss an entire category of meaningful information as irrational. A symbol, in Jung's framework, is not a code to be cracked with a dictionary. It is a living image that carries meaning too large, too complex, or too unconscious to be expressed directly in words. This is why a dream about a snake cannot be reduced to a single fixed meaning that applies to everyone. The snake might represent transformation, since it sheds its skin. It might represent a feared part of yourself, hidden and watchful. It might represent wisdom, danger, sexuality, healing, depending entirely on your specific history, your specific psyche, your specific relationship to that image. The work, Jung insisted, is not to look up symbols in a book and apply generic meanings. The work is to develop a relationship with your own symbolic language, to notice what specific images recur for you, what they tend to accompany, what they seem to be pointing toward when you sit with them honestly. This takes practice. Most people have never been asked to do it before. But it is, according to Jung, the beginning of being able to hear what is actually being communicated. 3. Synchronicity, when the outer world speaks the same language as your inner one. This is one of Jung's most controversial and most profound ideas. He observed, repeatedly, in his own life and in the lives of his patients, a phenomenon he could not explain through ordinary cause and effect. A patient would be discussing a dream involving a specific, unusual image, a golden beetle, in one of Jung's most famous accounts, and at that exact moment, an insect closely resembling that image would appear, tapping at the window. He called this synchronicity, a meaningful coincidence between an inner psychological state and an outer event, connected not by causation, but by meaning. Jung was careful here. He was not claiming that the universe rearranges physical reality to send you messages in a simplistic, wish-granting way. What he was proposing was more unsettling and more interesting. That the boundary between inner and outer, between psyche and world, might be less absolute than modern thinking assumes. That at certain charged moments, particularly moments of genuine psychological significance, the inner and outer worlds seem to rhyme with each other, in ways that defy ordinary explanation. You have experienced this. Almost everyone has. The person you were just thinking about calls you, unprompted, at that exact moment. The book that falls open to the exact page addressing the exact question you've been wrestling with. The stranger's comment overheard accidentally that answers something you'd been silently struggling with for weeks. Jung's instruction is not to manufacture meaning where none exists, chasing every coincidence into mysticism. It is to pay attention to the ones that carry an unmistakable charge, the ones that, when they happen, produce a felt sense of significance, a chill, a stillness, a sudden clarity, that ordinary coincidence does not produce. These, Jung believed, are worth taking seriously, not as proof of anything you could argue convincingly to a skeptic, but as data, information arriving through a channel modern life has trained you to dismiss. 4. The shadow, and why what God is telling you is often uncomfortable. Here is where Jung's framework becomes genuinely difficult, because most people, when they imagine receiving divine communication, imagine comfort, confirmation, reassurance that they are on the right path, loved, approved of. Jung's understanding of the unconscious suggests something far less comfortable. Much of what the deeper mind is trying to communicate involves the shadow, the parts of yourself you have rejected, denied, refused to look at directly. The anger you've called something else. The jealousy you've disguised as concern. The ambition you've hidden behind humility. The fear you've covered with false confidence. These rejected parts do not disappear simply because you have refused to acknowledge them. They go underground, and from underground, they exert enormous influence on your life, usually through projection. You see in others the very qualities you cannot bear to see in yourself. The person who cannot tolerate dishonesty in others is very often someone wrestling, unconsciously, with their own relationship to truth. The person enraged by other people's selfishness is very often suppressing enormous unmet needs of their own. Jung believed that one of the primary messages the unconscious is constantly trying to deliver, through dreams, through projections, through the people who irritate you disproportionately, is an invitation to integrate the shadow. Not to act out every rejected impulse, but to acknowledge its existence, to stop pretending it isn't there, to bring it into conscious awareness, where it can be examined honestly, rather than acted out blindly. This is often the most uncomfortable category of message a person receives, because it requires admitting something about yourself you have spent years avoiding. But Jung was clear, and this is one of his most quoted lines, that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. What feels like the universe being against you is often, in Jung's framework, the shadow finally demanding the attention you have refused to give it directly. 5. Active imagination, a practice for actually hearing it. Jung did not just theorize about this, he developed an actual technique. He called it active imagination. The method is this. Instead of analyzing a dream image intellectually from the outside, you re-enter it. You sit quietly, recall the image, the figure, the place, the animal, whatever symbolic content arose, and instead of thinking about it, you imagine engaging with it directly. You ask the figure in your dream what it wants. You let it answer, not by deciding the answer in advance, but by genuinely waiting to see what arises. You let the conversation unfold, almost like a piece of guided fiction, while staying alert to what surprises you. This sounds strange to a modern, rational mind, and Jung knew it would sound strange. He wrote about it carefully, aware of how easily it could be dismissed, or worse, misused. But his clinical observation, across decades of practice, was that this technique frequently produced insights that pure intellectual analysis could not reach. Because the unconscious, in Jung's framework, does not yield its content to direct interrogation. It yields it to engagement on its own terms, symbolic, imagistic, non-literal. If you want to know what is being communicated to you, Jung's method suggests, you cannot simply think harder about it. You have to meet it where it lives. This is one practical exercise you can try today. Take a symbol that has been recurring in your dreams or your waking attention, an image, a figure, even a strange phrase that keeps surfacing. Sit with it. Close your eyes if it helps, and simply ask it, internally, what it wants you to know. Do not force an answer. Let whatever arises, arise. 6. The self, and why the message always points toward wholeness. Jung made a careful distinction that changes everything once you understand it. The ego is not the same thing as the self. The ego is the part of you that you consciously identify with, your daily personality, your roles, your preferences, the story you tell about who you are. The self in Jung's framework is something larger. It is the totality of the psyche, conscious and unconscious combined, the center of the whole personality, not just the part you're aware of. And Jung believed that the deepest communications arriving through dreams, symbols, and synchronicity are not random. They come from the self, and they are always oriented toward one underlying purpose: wholeness. Not happiness in the simple sense, not comfort, not the satisfaction of every ego desire. Wholeness, the integration of everything you are, including the parts you've rejected, denied, or never developed. This is why the messages so often feel inconvenient. The ego wants comfort and certainty. The self wants completeness. And completeness frequently requires the ego to give up a fantasy it has been protecting. The recurring dream about a part of your house you've never explored is the self pointing to an undeveloped part of your psyche. The persistent pull toward a creative pursuit you've dismissed as impractical is the self insisting that a function of your personality has been neglected too long. The relationship that keeps producing the same painful pattern is the self forcing you to integrate a lesson your ego has avoided by changing partners instead of changing yourself. Jung called the entire process individuation, the lifelong work of becoming who you actually are, beneath the persona, beneath the conditioning, beneath the performance. And every authentic message from the unconscious, in his framework, is in service of this single, unifying project. You are not being told random things. You are being shown, piece by piece, what your wholeness requires. 7. Why the ego resists the message, and calls the resistance reason. If the unconscious is constantly trying to communicate something this important, why do so many people never receive it? Jung's answer is precise and uncomfortable. The ego is afraid of being decentered. For your entire conscious life, your ego has operated as though it were the entire story, the decision maker, the narrator, the one in charge. The self's communications threaten this arrangement, because they often suggest that the ego does not actually know best, that something deeper, older, and wiser has information the ego has been refusing to integrate. So the ego defends itself, and it defends itself by disguising fear as reason. That dream meant nothing, I just ate something strange. That coincidence was just coincidence, nothing more. That pull toward a different life is impractical, irresponsible, unrealistic. Jung observed that this is rarely a conscious lie. The ego genuinely believes its own dismissals, because believing them protects it from the disorienting work of actually listening. This is why the people most resistant to Jung's framework are often not stupid or unobservant. They are simply more committed to maintaining the current architecture of their identity than to discovering what lies beneath it. The first step in actually hearing the message is recognizing this specific form of resistance in yourself: the reflexive dismissal, the too quick rationalization, the automatic explaining away of anything that would require you to reconsider who you think you are. Jung's instruction is not to abandon reason. It is to notice when reason is being recruited as a bodyguard for the ego, rather than used as an honest tool of discernment. There is a difference between genuinely examining something and finding it unconvincing, and reflexively rejecting something because accepting it would be inconvenient. Learning to tell these apart in yourself is one of the most important skills this entire framework requires.